So welcome, everybody. It's great to see a full house here. I know there's a lot of different people who have different experiences with this subject. We're looking at homelessness in Jackson County, and I want to start right off the bat by saying I know the term homeless can ring a bit insincere to some folks. It's not person-centered language, and as we talk about this issue within our community, we're going to try and be person-centered whenever we can. So we'll use terms like unhoused, people who lack stable housing, but really focusing on the individuals who are at the heart of this concern within our community. And also at the same time, there's times when people still use the term homeless. I know I do, and I really mean no disrespect by it. And as we all grow in our language and our ability to focus on this population, I ask that we're gracious with each other, knowing that we're all here to provide humane and safe treatment for our residents. Today's presentation is part one of two. It's kind of the front end of the presentation. So we're looking at some of the front end strategies for people who are unhoused and unsheltered in our communities in terms of how we are addressing safety needs, how we're addressing their health needs, how we're addressing their behavioral health needs, how we're looking at wellness within our community from an environmental standpoint. And really, when you look at the nature of our presentation today, we're going to talk about environmental strategies for dealing with folks who are unhoused in our communities. We're going to look at policing strategies in terms of how we are addressing folks in our community. And we're going to look at behavioral health for people on the front end from a crisis standpoint, as well as from just a long-term engagement and moving people towards more sustainable housing, what we can do. And then part two is going to be more of those wraparound pieces. What are we doing long-term for folks, and how do we engage them? And knowing that when we use a broad term like homelessness in our community, it can incorporate a variety of people in a variety of situations. And for our purposes within the local Public Safety Coordinating Council, we're trying to really focus on that overlap with public safety. So that's really kind of our common ground when we talk about these different pieces, and I hope you'll keep that in mind. I also want to admit freely that there are a number of interventions and awesome programs and things going on that really do support people who are unhoused, unsheltered, or precariously housed. I'm getting there, Connie, in our community, and they may not be represented in this presentation. And if in the scope between this month and next month, if you'd like to reach out to me directly, I can look at ways to incorporate that work where we can. But I've already spoken quite a bit because we have a lot of presenters and we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to share their materials. So I do want to talk a little bit about the point in time study mentioned that 85% of the people who were unhoused in our community resided in either Medford or Ashland. But we look at this concern as an overarching concern throughout the county. And to that regard, the county has invested in any 1 year over $500,000 on mental health. And almost another $100,000 on human service grants. County Parks investing $60,000. And then Community Justice, the department that I work at, $2.4 million. County investments are over $3 million to address this concern and make sure that our residents are safe, stable, and that the environment, mental impacts are mitigated. So wanted to kind of talk about that just to show the overarching nature of it. And I did touch on language a little bit. If folks do have feedback from me or other presenters later, please let us know. But we are really going to try and speak a common language where we can and a person-centered language whenever we can as well. So with that said, we have a short video and we'll bring up our first presenter.
They're out to help them. That's one of the reasons why I've been out here. After they figure out if they're a veteran, one of the things they do is they back away and they allow me to try to motivate these homeless veterans to get out and get out of this homeless situation and seek services and and utilize them.
You need a jacket? Yeah, we do. Thank you.
Okay, here's a couple water bottle, a couple snack bars. I got some more in the truck if you need some. So
one of the myths is that there's families out on the Greenway that we're dealing with, and I don't remember ever coming across a family in the 7-8 years that I've been doing this operation. We have a lot of individuals that are down their luck, but we also have a lot of criminals on the Greenway. So we brought in parole and probation to help us with this, which has been another great tool.
Good morning. I'm Connie Wilkerson with the Jackson County Continuum of Care, and I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to discuss language today and statistics as they pertain to individuals who are experiencing homelessness. Language really does matter. It helps us to promote dignity when we're addressing one another, and it establishes standardization of terminology, such as these 3 categories of homelessness, which are sheltered, unsheltered, and precariously housed. Sheltered means an individual might have a voucher for a hotel stay, might be an emergency or a seasonal shelter, or living in transitional housing. A person is considered to be experiencing homelessness until they are permanently housed. Unsheltered means an individual who is living in a tent or car camping. Many of those we would meet along the Greenway. And also individuals who are residing at some place like Hope Village, because that does not meet the definition of human habitation, as each unit doesn't have heat, electricity, or running water. Precariously housed is a category that we don't capture in a point-in-time count. It is for individuals who are couch surfing or staying with friends and family, in other words, doubling up. The general definition of homelessness is pretty self-apparent. Being homeless means that you have no home or permanent place of residence. However, definitions really are more complicated than that, especially when we look at federal definitions. HUD talks about the fact that a person is experiencing homelessness if they are residing in a place that's not meant for human habitation. Once again, not having heat, electricity, or running water, or if they're in emergency shelter or transitional housing, or exiting an institution such as jail where they've been temporarily housed. HUD also has many different definitions for specialized subpopulations, such as those who are fleeing domestic violence and have no support system or another place to be housed. However, when we go over to another part of the federal government, such as the Department of Education, there's a different standard for homelessness. When we look at the McKinney-Vento Act, it talks about homeless youth and children who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And so this would include those who are precariously housed, those who are couch surfing, or doubling up with friends and family. So how many people actually are experiencing homelessness in Jackson County? You'll see different numbers here. Every year we conduct our point-in-time count, and that's just a snapshot of area homelessness taken on one night during the last 10 days of January. Here in Jackson County, we perform that count every 2 years, although it's only federally mandated to be done every year, although it's only federally mandated to be done every 2 years, because we want to look at gaps in services and barriers and trends. This year's count is a little down from the prior year. The prior year was 732, and this year is 712. More importantly, I think, is if we look at the data in our homeless management information system. And that's data that is overseen by the Jackson County Continuum of Care. And as of last week, we had 1,783 households who were unsheltered, experiencing homelessness in one way or another. Who are registered in our database, that's right, and are on the centralized interest list for housing. And then we see the number 2,252, and these are the individuals who qualify according to the McKinney-Vento Act. So they're couch surfing or doubling up with friends or family, not having a regular nighttime place to sleep. What's important about the point-in-time count is that it allows us to capture data on who meets the definition of being chronically homeless. A person is chronically homeless if they have experienced homelessness for at least 12 consecutive months and have a disabling condition, or have experienced homelessness for separate episodes in a 3-year period and also have a disabling condition. These disabling conditions are defined by the federal government as a diagnosable substance use disorder, a serious mental illness, developmental disability, chronic physical illness, or physical disability, or a co-occurrence of 2 or more of those. That means an individual really has great needs in the community, and they become more and more vulnerable the longer that they remain unhoused. When we look at our 3-year statistics on chronically homeless, it was really troubling in 2018 when it suddenly increased to about 1 out of every 3 homeless residents of Jackson County meeting the definition of being chronically homeless. In the prior year, it had been 1 in 4, and this year it's approximately 1 in 4 again. Also troubling is the fact that Orange area just keeps getting larger. And the orange represents those who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. So these are card camps and tent camps and living in other places not meant for human habitation. This will be very hard for you to see, but I'll just point out a few things here. This is our point-in-time count by population in a comparison. And so if you look at the two farthest bars, you'll notice the chronically homeless, and you'll see how, even though it's coming down in actual number of those who meet that definition, the amount of those who are unsheltered continues to grow. Also, we see a large uptick in two populations, those who are experiencing mental illness and those who have a substance use disorder. Every year we ask localized questions on our point-in-time count because we want to gather more data that's pertinent to the residents here in our county and not just the data we have to report to the federal government. And so of those 712 individuals who were interviewed, 2/3 reported having one or more disabling conditions. And the top 4 of those were mental health in the gray, physical disability in the yellow, chronic health condition in the orange, and chronic drug use in the blue. If we look at a larger data pool in the Homeless Management Information System, we find the same results, that the top 4 disabilities out of the 1,783 households are the same. So physical disability, chronic health condition, substance use disorder, and mental health. So where exactly do people consider home? Many times we hear that Jackson County is a magnet for people who are unsheltered, not stably housed, and they're coming here to receive the homeless services. And our data shows that that is not the case. Less than 10% of those that we interview state that they were homeless and came here. So 90% are stating that they were already living here when they entered into this period of homelessness. And as Eric mentioned earlier, 86% of these individuals reside either in the municipalities of Medford or Ashland. Homelessness in Jackson County is really a long-term situation. In those 1,783 households, we have individuals who have reported 28 continual years of being homeless, and we have 681 of those households, which is 38%, stating that they've been homeless for 1 or more years. So that just means that risk factors increase and the need for wraparound services becomes greater and greater. It's very hard to stop the patterns of that are established during a homeless period if you don't have the wraparound support systems. We captured data on people that were 77 years old this year living outside in tents, 2 77-year-olds, and the majority are in their late 40s. That's the average age. But if you were to look across all of our data, it is predominantly white, male, non-Hispanic, over the age of 24.
Well, for a long time, different law enforcement agencies and different parks departments in the Greenway were working towards the same cause, towards cleaning the Greenway up, but they were doing it under kind of separate planning and coordination processes. So the Parks Department and the Sheriff's Department here within Jackson County stepped up and formed a coalition, I would say, to coordinate with different parks programs across the different cities and the different law enforcement agencies across the valley, and really take a coordinated approach and plan Greenway sweeps towards getting some of the population that has made the Greenway a home off of the population and making it more of a recreational facility, which is what it was designed for.
Our goal is not to just go out and cite individuals for illegally camping or trespassing on the Greenway, but to actually help them reintegrate into society. So bringing the veterans groups out, bringing Jackson County Mental Health out, and a lot of the other organizations were able to collaborate.
Thanks for having us here. I'm Andy Austell. I work with Jackson County Parks, and I am the Greenway manager for the county. So I'm going to do a brief presentation. I was told brief, and that's hard for me, but I'll do my best here. I just wanted to touch base on the Joint Powers Agreement, which is what we have in place to manage the Greenway. And what that is all 5 cities we're in partnership with all the 5 cities that the Greenway runs through. from Ashland to Central Point, as well as the county, to help manage the greenway. The goal of that was to achieve a uniform greenway. Before this was in place, we saw a lot of inconsistencies with different sections of the greenway. You would, in one section, you'd hit a different city, and it would be totally different than what you had seen previously. So we really wanted a consistent level of service, and that's what we're achieving right now. Funds, all 5 cities and the county puts into the joint powers agreement, and that funds the community justice crew, which is on the next slide here. So with all that funding, we have a $57,000 per year, per fiscal year budget, and that's what I work on. Depending on priorities and projects, and the time of the season is how many days I get the crew out there to do work out there on the greenway. So for example, I put 3 days usually in the spring when the vegetation's growing the most. I definitely have them 3 days a week to help keep that down, and for fire restrictions as well. And then in December, January, when the weather's kind of nasty, we kind of put them down to 1 day a week so I can use them more when we need them. Cities might have priorities, so they do contact me quite often saying, hey, we need some help over here. Can I get a crew to come help us with a section in our area? And so that's kind of how we prioritize, depending on city needs. I also wrote down there a consistent crew leader, and that's really important with community justice, that we have one crew leader that is just dedicated to the greenway from community justice that brings the work crews out. And his name's Don Moore, and he's super passionate like I am about the greenway, and he cares about what he's doing. So it's really easy to work with him on that. Just some of the priorities, nothing's in order, but we wanted to maintain 10 feet safety zone on each side of the greenway path. So that increases visibility and safety, and we wanted the users out there that we want out there, the legitimate users, to feel comfortable. And they all said, compared to, I'll have some pictures coming up, to how it was in the past, they feel much more safe, comfortable using the greenway with clearing and line of sight. We maintain the trail surface, so we keep the path blown and clear of debris and hazards, and root heaves are a big issue, but we've been grinding those down for safety. The homeless camp cleanups, working with law enforcement, which we'll get into. That's a big one that we do out there. Graffiti and vandalism, we've noticed an increase in vandalism and graffiti, so we try to stay on that when it happens and cover it up. And then, once again, any special requests from the cities. So I'm going to go through these quick. Here's the crews out there doing the brushing. Just some before and afters that really show how it was. That one on the top right is a really good example. That's how the greenway looked in a lot of areas, which you felt very enclosed, and you didn't know what was on the side as you're out there. So now we're trying to keep it brushed back 10 feet, even a little bit more in certain areas. Camp garbage removal, we'll get into that with Sergeant First as well. He'll be talking about that, but sometimes we brought in the roads department has helped us with large equipment. There's a ton of stuff out there that we're trying to keep picked up. I didn't put that in here to make anybody ill, but this is a hazard out there, and we deal with this all the time. So we have to deal with the human waste hazards out there, and sketchy. Just some other hazards out there. Needles is a big thing. We count them too as we pick them up. One day, within a 6-hour cleanup, we had close to 200 needles in one day. And a lot of those are uncapped, so we're really careful. Talk to the crews when they're out there to give them a little safety talk, to not just grab anything. Make sure that if they see something, they let us know. We come pick them up safely. And then that other graffiti picture there was right against the creek. Somebody painted this really cool area out there with just a ton of acrylic paint or latex paint or whatever paint doesn't come off. And it's a big hazard right there on the water, and that was a really cool little rock to be out on. So like I said, we're going to get into, with Sergeant First is going to be talking a lot about some before and afters, because that really shows how much we do out there, and we'll get into some numbers as well. But that shows from top to bottom there, the before and afters, and we always try to get a good shot of that to really show how much we did on each cleanup. Working closely with law enforcement, so I feel like County Parks has really grown with all the local law enforcement agencies and the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. having a good partnership with them. I wanted to mention that the Parks Department and Roads Department with the county just hired a deputy. Deputy Strohmeyer is the one that's now a Roads and Parks deputy that works with us out of the Sheriff's Department. And he'll be spending a lot of time on the Greenway helping, and I'm really excited about that opportunity to have somebody out there a little bit more with the Sheriff's Department that can really help with some of these issues that we're dealing with. I know Sergeant First once again has some numbers on how much we've cleaned up, but we do 1 to 2 times a month coordinated cleanups. So with Medford Police, Central Point, Phoenix, and County Sheriffs, we locate areas where we're having issues and problems and complaints, and we plan to go out there, and they'll get into the details how that works, and then I come through with the crews and help clean that up. Jackson County Parks assists with the expenses, and so does Medford Police Department assist with prices, costs associated with the cleanups. I put an example in February. We did a cleanup that removed roughly 220 cubic yards of garbage in just February alone. That's a lot. And if you see the cost down there, $450 a day to have a crew out there. On these cleanups, we usually have 2 crews, but sometimes we've been doing 3 for larger cleanups. And then dumpsters, we usually get at least 2 40-yard dumpsters every cleanup. So we're on track right now to be close, by the end of this year, about $20,000 in just garbage removal fees. This one is just the routine maintenance, the blowing of the debris, vandalism, and repairs to anything, graffiti, the litter garbage, and we also do a lot of underneath the bridge cleanups because that seems to be hot spots too where we have to hit and clean up. Just an example, this was in Medford, I believe near Hawthorne. They have a lot of interpretive signs which are pretty cool and the users really like that. But this happens all the time, so we try to hit it quick and clean them up and keep them looking good out there. And then last, I just want to say that we recently added a volunteer coordinator with county parks, and this is growing really big right now. So we have tons of big groups that want to be involved. We want the community involved to help us. And we're doing like Adopt a Trail, where there's sections of the trail and we almost have it all filled out, where you have partnerships like Rogue Valley Manor has adopted a section, and they go down there and help pick up litter just along the trail. Asante is now very interested. Just a ton of businesses and special interest groups that want to be out there. And we're doing a lot of individual cleanups with these big groups. They really want to be a part of this. So we're excited about that. And then this Saturday, we have our second Solve event of the year, which is Stop Organ Littering and Vandalism. And it's a pretty big event. It's from Central Point all the way to Ashland. We have 11 check-in stations along the Greenway that people can come volunteer and help clean up for the day.
I'm Sergeant First of the Medford Police Department, and I'll give you just a brief history on the Greenway health and safety operations. And anybody that knows the Greenway, it's a very unique and very complex pathway with a lot of vegetation areas that would seem kind of rural. And that's where a lot of the problems come from that we're dealing with. We have 7 miles, a little over 7 miles in the city, and since we partnered with the Sheriff's Office, we go all the way up to Dean Creek. We cover 10.5 to 11 miles of Greenway, and we're starting to do that every operation now, so we can make sure that we try and reach out as many people as we can. It was about 10 years ago that we started the program at the Medford Police Department. 4 years in, saw a huge shift in homelessness. The type of people, we're starting to have more criminals, more mental health clients, and more drug-addicted people out there. And a lot of that's a combination of, and I felt like we're beating our heads against the walls. So it was about 6 years ago that we started reaching out to different organizations, and we thought since we couldn't get the individuals we were dealing with to come take services in the daytime, we started bringing services to them. And as we go through this, we'll kind of talk a little bit about what has worked and what we continue to do. So health and safety is what we're doing out there, truthfully. We want to make it safer, and we also need to have that perception. People need to understand it's safer. It is getting safer, but not everybody's quite understanding and believing it at this point, and that's one of the things we want to change. We're going to do that through crime reduction. Service Connections has been huge for us. The veterans groups have been with us from the start, and we used to come across 8 to 10 veterans in operation. We come across 1 veteran the last 3 operations. And we have over 120 veterans that we know that have been off of the Greenway into some type of program and housing. So the services work. Where we're kind of lacking is the civilian services that can come out there, and we're actually working on that too. And I think Chief Costin will talk about the livability team. We recently brought out Jackson County Mental Health, and that's helping a lot. And then, of course, you can look around and through Andy's pictures and these pictures, the environmental impact is huge. A lot of this stuff, a lot of stuff's already been swept into the creek as the rains come.
Sergeant, if I recall, there are very strict state laws if you're removing an encampment that you have to inventory and store belongings or something like that. Are you having to, is that part of what you have to deal with?
When we come across belongings that we can actually identify. But so what we post the camps by law. We always give them well over the 24 hours notice. When we contact people, we tell them, hey, anything left behind is trash. If we do come across something that's personal property, we log it in, or something that we can identify that's valuable and things like that, and we do store that. So this is currently where we are: Medford Police, Jackson County Sheriff's Office, Parole and Corrections, Patrol and Corrections, Parole and Probation, Mental Health Crisis Team's been coming out for several months now, and then the veteran groups that have kind of been there from the start. The VA, Access, Veterans Outreach, and Rogue Valley Veterans Community Outreach. And one of the things that's nice about those organizations is they come out and they don't just say, well, you're not a veteran, we're not going to try and help you and get you connected. So this is a good group. Anybody that wants to join, we're happy to increase this collaboration to be much more successful. With the Sheriff's Department coming on, it's been about 2 years. It's been a godsend for us because it just helps us with manpower. It also, we're not pushing these people. They're going into the county, and then the county does an operation, then they come back to the city. They understand that, hey, we're here to help you, to get you connected. We're serious about this, and we need to get you off of the Greenway. So safety is huge for us. We intelligence gathering, it's a big thing. We have a lot of, like I talked about, we have a lot of people that are involved in criminal activity on the Greenway. So it's nice. Every time we do an operation, we can track, and we've been able to locate people just because of our last contacts or where we have multiple contacts with them. Reduction in crime, we're continuing to get out there more and more. Use some of those videos or pictures. It looks like there's bike chop shops out there. We find lawnmowers, a lot of stolen property out there. Sex offender compliance, a big one. More registered sex offenders are taken up on the Greenway, so we can go out and we can actually check on them too and make sure they're in compliance. And then just the reduction of the illegal burning is huge. We had that fire season the previous season, it was a bad fire season. A lot of those were started on the Greenway from a lot of illegal burns from campsites, and we even had a fatality in Central Point, I believe, from something similar to one of those illegal burns. This is where we're at just through September. We have 3 more operations to go. Like I said, with parole and probation out there, it really helps us a lot with trying to hold these corrections clients accountable. 82 warrant arrests, 18 PVs. Those are individuals, not just because there's probably like 130 warrants. As you know, more people often have more warrants. 325 camping citations, the trespass, drug offenses, and there's a ton of other crimes and violations that I just don't list. Again, our goal, is not just to arrest our way out of this, because we can't do that. We're trying to get the service connections, but that just gives you a picture of the type of people that we're dealing with on the Greenway. And there's a ton of other crimes and violations that I just don't list. Again, our goal, is not just to arrest our way out of this, because we can't do that. We're trying to get the service connections, but that just gives you a picture of the type of people that we're dealing with on the Greenway. I talked about that shift when I was 4 years into this, and it's definitely shifted to a lot of people with a lot more addiction, mental health, and criminal behavior. So after we do the cleanup operation, we work with the Jackson County Parks, which has been huge for us. And Andy's great to work with, Steve Lambert. And we go out with a community justice work crew and hit the locations we have. Just because of time constraints and the amount of trash out there. We can't always get across the whole greenway, so we have to pick the spots that are the worst, and then now we're doing a good job of trying to keep an active presence so they don't get re-inhabited, so we don't keep getting more trash buildup, and we're slowly gaining some ground, which is good. And then these are just environmental impact pictures, and you know the shopping carts are expensive, and we probably pull 10 to 15 shopping carts, if I can spit it out there, each operation. So that's a lot of money to the other businesses. And then there's 800 cubic yards to date of trash, and we're not done. And that's just too much. So again, that's what we're trying to reduce by the constant presence after each operation. And then there should be some before and after pictures. Unfortunately, sometimes we come in and then we go right back, and it can look like that. So you never know what you're going to find on the Greenway.
All right, my name is Scott Clausen. I'm Chief of Police of Medford. And when I heard we were going to talk about homeless and some of the strategies to address it, I was pretty excited because we have a new initiative recently. It's that started in July, and it's our livability team. So I'll give you a little bit of a brief history here. You can go ahead and turn it to the next one. So what the conversation started back in 2017 when we had a sexual assault that occurred out behind Crater Lake Ford and along the Greenway. And this really prompted us to take a hard look at it. And what happened is, I'll just give you a brief synopsis, but we had a flight attendant who came into town, was staying at Rogue Regency, was told that the Greenway was a great place to exercise. She wanted to go for a run. She ended up going down to the Greenway, where she was chased down by an intoxicated homeless man. And fortunately, somebody intervened, and that's what really started to drive this conversation forward. So the motion was made with our city council to bring staff together and look at how we could enforce city code. We specifically wanted to take a look at the Greenway, of course, and then did the downtown area, and then come up with recommended funding options. So after convening with our public works director, our city manager, Parks and Rec, bringing everybody to the table to discuss what we were doing right, we determined that what we could potentially do with funding, additional funding, is do what Steve has started and has been in place, but do that on an enhanced basis, kind of do his program but on steroids. So the concept was to hire 3 police officers, 1 code enforcement officer, and 1 record specialist. And the record specialist is just to help absorb some of the increased workload that would be created. So it took a while. It took almost a year because we thought we were going to be able to apply for cops hiring funding. What we hadn't realized is that the dispute with the Trump administration and the sanctuary city statutes were going to cause that funding to be delayed. That ended up being a mess that wasn't cleared up until recently, which was a decision by the Ninth Circuit Court. But in this last budget session, our city council and budget committee decided this was such an important issue that they gave us funding for 2 years. So it's a funding to fund the livability team for $600,000 each year. So it was a total $1.2 million ask. In addition to the personnel for law enforcement, they also gave Parks and Rec an additional $300,000 above and beyond their budget to help deal with the vegetation removal. So we felt like those two were really important factors, because what we know is when we have line of sight from the roadway down to the creek, for example, and a great example of that is along Siskiyou, where you can actually see, because they've cleared all the vegetation out, you can see now down into the creek area. So prevents people from setting up camps. So that's part of the focus. So I'm happy to say that last week we actually started all 3 officers, our code enforcement officer, and so this week marks week 2. So our goals for this unit, we spent a lot of time on the planning stages of this, because we really wanted to focus on two important factors. One, we know that as in law enforcement, we have to keep the pressure up. We have to enforce the law and target criminal behavior. So that's been the first thing. The second thing that was really important to us was to capture the outreach piece. So our enforcement, fortunately, we have 5 school resource officers, and although we knew there was going to be a delay in getting the livability up and running, we have 5 school resource officers that went down this summer and really hammered the parks. And they were looking for criminal behavior. They were looking for disorderly conduct, drinking in public, and exclusion violations. So exclusion violations, just so you don't know, we've had the exclusion violation or the exclusion zone in Medford. 10th Street borders it, 5th Street, all the way up. Now it encompasses the county buildings all the way down to Bear Creek. So once somebody's excluded, they have a 90-day exclusion, and they can't come back into that area. So just to be clear, we're not targeting homeless people, we're targeting criminal behavior. So that's how somebody earns themselves an exclusion violation. So the outreach portion of this is part of my vision for this team, and it's really important that we accomplish this. But we have to connect the homeless to resources. And a study that the LaSAR did for us about the Homeless System Action Plan, that was one of their recommendations and a goal that we're going to achieve. So I think it's really important that through outreach, not only are we recommending services and the right services, but we're also building rapport with folks. I think that's going to be a critical success factor. For example, Steve probably remembers this, but we used to have La Clinica bring their van down every time we'd do a monthly sweep. And we put it up in a parking lot. It'd be 30 yards away, and we'd contact people down on the Greenway. We'd tell them, go get medical services, go get your dental services, whatever you need. There's no cost. They're here to serve you. And they stopped doing it because nobody would show up at the van. So, and it's interesting. I mean, when you look at it, that's not what their needs were at the moment. Their needs were really just staying warm, were clothing. They're just trying to survive. They're looking for their next meal, and a medical and dental was not at the top of their priority list. So I think building rapport helps us answer that question. It may be right then they didn't need medical, but maybe on the 5th or 6th visit with them, maybe in a couple months they might be interested in that. So it's building rapport and determining where somebody's at in their life and trying to get them the resources at the appropriate moment. So I'm excited about some of the innovations. This is, again, we're only in week 2. I would love to be able to come in and share with you our success stories. We have a few success stories already, but this is just kind of my vision, and this is my last slide here. But we're really excited about this team. We think it's going to really change the face of our community in the downtown and the Greenway area. We ended up renaming our division the Community Engagement Division, which encompasses all of our outreach folks, our neighborhood livability partnership, our code enforcement. So the second thing I'm excited about is a case management type model, and that's something that we're going to be doing. We have the neighborhood livability partnership, like I mentioned a minute ago, and that's really changing the old model where we used to take a complaint about a problem house and respond out there, tell people to knock it off. It generally didn't work. And now the model is that we sit down in meetings like this, we bring in addictions recovery, parole and probation, the sheriff's office, our city attorneys, and bring all those people, mental health, don't want to forget mental health, bring all those people together and say, how can we strategize to address an issue? And then we take all those folks and we, at a designated time, and we take them out to that residence. And we've had better success doing it that way by getting people into immediate services, by getting people who are on abscond status immediately back into the jail, getting folks into addiction recovery centers. So we're going to take that model and do that for the homeless. And I'll just give you just a quick case study here. This is an individual who we currently have in our jail. I asked one of my livability officers to write up kind of a synopsis of what one thing that we're working on right now. In the beginning of September, Officer Josephson, one of our corporals, met with our city attorney, Karen McLean from Addictions Recovery, Darren Tuturi from he's a mental health specialist in our jail, and took a look at one of our clients. And I'll just, for his privacy, I'll just call him Mr. Peters. But Mr. Peters has been what I would term a chronic nuisance person. He has 137 open violations. He owes our court $19,000 in fines. He's currently in jail for 90 days with a projected release date at the 1st of November. So this group sat down and established some short-term and long-term goals for him. So his barriers are mental illness, chronic alcoholism, and chronic homelessness. So not only will he not take care of the fines, but will probably never, or he won't take care of his violations and show up to court, but he's not, certainly will never see that $19,000. So the short-term goal is for Jackson County Mental Health to work on getting Mr. Peters a diagnosis, a treatment plan, and get him signed up with the Oregon Health Plan. Addictions recovery piece of this will be to have a residential bed available to him to treat the alcohol addiction. And then the legal part of it will be to facilitate early release if entering a treatment facility and coordinate with his defense counsel. As far as a long-term goal, Jackson County Mental Health is going to assist us with connecting him to Options or Columbia Care for ongoing mental health treatment. And then once completed an inpatient program through addictions recovery, we hope to be able to transfer him to either Oxford House or Rogue Retreat. And then our legal division, again, can work on establishing a plan for him to help him forgive some of the fines, to help him get the charges reduced, and then so that he can potentially, hopefully becomes a productive citizen again, where he can get his license back. And so that's just kind of an example. It's not a success story. Again, he's currently lodged in our jail, so ultimately the responsibility lies with him. But that's the kind of model and the mentality that I'm encouraging our livability team folks to have. So I mentioned forgiving fines. We're also taking a look at community court, and I know Sheriff Sickler is very invested in this and interested in this topic, but we don't ever want a massive amount of fines or criminal charges to be a barrier to housing. So if there's things that we can do to help people through that process, we want to take a look at that. That's not a one-size-fits-all, and it shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't be dismissing cases and fines and criminal convictions for that reason solely. But I think there is a population where this could work. The final piece of this is just educating our faith-based organizations and nonprofits. We started to have a conversation recently with those folks, and I'm seeing some positive results. And I'll just give you an example. St. Vincent de Paul out on North Pacific Highway really is re-strategizing on how much they give out to the homeless. They have people who come in on a daily basis and just get new clothes, or they get new bedding, or sleeping bags, or tents. And so they're just leaving all this stuff behind. It's just we make it too easy for them to just walk away. So they're really taking a look at that and strategizing on how much they give out and what they give out to help make our jobs easier, to make Andy Austill's job easier and Steve's job easier. So anyway, these are just a few of the things. I hope to be able to come back in a year and tell you that this was a grandiose success. So we'll see.
Since we've been collaborating with groups like the Rogue Valley Veterans Community Outreach, Jackson County Mental Health, a lot of other citizen groups are starting to trust the local police and understand that although we have a enforcement job, that we're also reaching out and trying to bring services to the homeless that we come across and try and enrich their lives and get them connected with the groups so they can hopefully start reintegrating back into society.
Modern day policing is not a one-man show or a two-man show. Everybody works together. There's partnerships in the community, partnerships with all the different law enforcement agencies. And so if we don't work together, we're just moving the problem around from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Slowly, what we're finding out is as we bring resources to these people, each time we have contact with them, we're developing trust. We're also able to work with them and gather intelligence for any criminal activity that goes on the Greenway. But only way to really measure it is the fact that people are feeling safer out there using the Greenway. We're having less crime reports, so those statistics are down.
So I'm Rick Rollins with Jackson County Mental Health. I oversee our crisis and our outpatient services. And I'm going to talk a little today about what we do in our crisis services, some of our connections with law enforcement and what we're doing to partner with law enforcement, as well as some of the questions about, what happens in the community, how come we can't just pick people up and put them in long-term hospitalization, and some of the barriers that we face for that. So I'm going to start talking about some of our crisis services because you may not be aware of everything that we offer at our awesome HHS building. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what our services are. I think, go ahead and, here's my next slide. So our 24/7, it does feel like 27/7, but 24/7 crisis services. If somebody wants, they can call our crisis line. I have some, I'll go ahead and pass these around if anybody wants them. Take as many as you wish and we will get you more. So we try to float these throughout the community so people are aware of our 24/7 crisis line. Again, it's staffed by masters, PhD level clinicians that can respond over the phone. We also have a mobile response team that I'll talk a bit more about. We do have walk-in services, so Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Anybody can walk into our crisis area and receive immediate crisis counseling. It doesn't matter what insurance coverage they do or don't have, we will make sure that we see them and address the current crisis and try to be the central hub of the spokes in the community and connect them into other community resources, other treatment agencies as we need to. And then inside our crisis area, we have what we call the living room. And this was designed at the time the building was built really for a place to give people the resources that they need at the moment they come in, really the Maslow's hierarchy. So we have it staffed by peer support specialists. And we can, if you can see, there's a living room there. We will fix them a meal if they need it. We also have a sleeping room. We have linens, so they can rest if they need to. We also have a shower. We have all the soaps, shampoo, towels if they need to take a shower. When this was first built and the building opened up, about 5 years ago, I think the concern was, this is going to be all the homeless in the community will come here. We really haven't seen that this is overutilized by those that don't have housing, because it's a mental health component and they need to come in, they're going to get a risk assessment, they're going to meet with the therapist, and that tends to have people find other resources. But we use this pretty much every day. Somebody is either getting a shower, sleeping, we're getting somebody some food. So we utilize this living room every day. It's been a great resource. The other thing that we have is our mobile response team, and we've done a lot of work to increase mobile response. This is something that the state has really put focus on as part of the Department of Justice settlement with the state. They really are putting a focus on crisis teams being mobile, going out in the community and meeting with people when they need it, with the idea that we are going to the location of where the crisis is happening. So we are going out with law enforcement. If we get a phone call and we feel like we need to go out with that person, then we can go directly out to them in the community. We can go to doctor's offices, schools, you name it. We can go mobile. And that's just 24/7, call the crisis line, and we can be available to go mobile. Talk a little bit about our partnerships with law enforcement. I'm going to pass a few things around. This one is specifically for law enforcement. we've always been available for law enforcement to call us and have us respond, have us consult over the phone. One of the areas we found was a challenge is how to get a hold of us. So after hours, we have a messaging service, so they would have to call the messaging service, who would call us. They would give us the number, we'd call them back. During the day, same thing, they're going to call, talk with our call center staff, who would get a hold of a crisis worker. We felt that was just a little bit too complicated, and we wanted to be more readily available. So we created a law enforcement-only crisis backline. So now, when a law enforcement officer needs to consult with a crisis worker, they can call us. It'll ring directly to our cell phone that our crisis staff have 24/7, and they can get a hold of somebody with just one call. The other thing that this card, so we're now going around to all the different agencies and doing briefings. We just got these printed. Actually, I went to Sergeant First's briefing yesterday, and they were the first ones to get these cards, so you guys are the other first people to even see these cards. But we have some local resources that we print on there, so they have not just our phone number, but other community phone numbers. And then there's a decision tree about when to contact us, when to take somebody to the hospital, when you might use the Moore Center. So helping law enforcement have some ideas of who to contact, and then they can fold it in half and keep it in their pocket. The other thing that we are giving them in stacks is we've kind of updated our cards. Go ahead and pass those around again. If anybody didn't get one or needs more. This is the community outreach card that law enforcement can hand out. It has our 24/7 crisis number on there, has our walk-in hours available, and then it also has some of the main crisis numbers. It has some of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline or National Text Line, the addiction treatment services through the ARC and On Track, and some of the shelters, the men's and women's gospel missions, and St. Vincent de Paul. So those phone numbers are on there so they can help people in the community have some other resources. So we've met with all of Ashland PD. We've met pretty much with every briefing with Medford so far. We've already been connected with the Sheriff's Office and done briefings with them. We're going to follow up with some of these additional resources with them. Working on Central Point and Eagle Point. We're working our way through all the different agencies and going to every briefing of every shift for all the law enforcement. So myself and Bailey have been pretty busy. Go back one slide. Let me see if there's something else on that one. Let me talk a little bit about our neighborhood livability program. So you've heard a lot about that. That's something that we partner with. We see that as a very helpful process. I love what Chief Clausen is doing and having a specific livability program. We are there every month on the meetings. We've gone out with them into the homes and help offer resources. So I think that is a great community process. So hats off to what MPD is doing. The other thing we do is some of the training. So yeah, go ahead and let's talk about our training components. So we offer CIT, which is Crisis Intervention Team training. Sometimes people think of it as crisis intervention training, but it's actually crisis intervention team. It's supposed to be a law enforcement specific training. Since 2013, we've held 12 academies. I think over 200 officers have been trained from pretty much every law enforcement agency in the county. We're doing our 13th academy in April, so this is kind of first announcement for some of the law enforcement. I'll pass these around. Again, for this one, really for law enforcement, take these if you're not law enforcement. I'm really not going to invite you, but it really is for law enforcement specific. It's a 40-hour training to understand mental health components, understand addiction components, learn local resources. We talk about response models and how to respond to somebody who is having a mental health crisis as opposed to a criminal issue. We do tours of the behavioral health unit, of the VA, of our crisis center. We do scenario-based training. So it's a pretty intense full week. One of the things that I realized as part of this is every time we have sponsored this, I've had community members, from other our partner agencies that are not law enforcement that hear about this and want to come. And so we've had them come in the years past, but it's never really been a great fit because It's law enforcement specific. We're really talking about law enforcement practices, and they're asking questions that just kind of throw the training off course a bit. So in my spare time, we decided to do a whole new conference. So this one I'll pass around anybody who wants one of these. So I kind of labeled this initially, it was kind of like CIT training for non-law enforcement. We're now calling it the Community Treatment Services Conference. So it's a 3-day training, really with the same basic core elements that we offer in our CIT for community service partners. So treatment agencies, kind of frontline staff that need to understand some of those basics of community resources, mental health and addiction. We'll talk about adverse childhood experiences and suicide prevention and de-escalation skills. We're going to end with a panel of presentations from addictions, treatment, community partners, and some of our homeless resources. So registration is open for that. Here's my plug. Okay. So we're doing a lot of training and a lot of partnering with our with community. Okay. So this is kind of the part about how come, mental health, how come you guys just can't take these people off the Greenway, take them out of the city parks and get them into some long-term mental health treatment? And there's some challenges that come with that. So I'm just going to address a few of those components and how the system works in Oregon and why sometimes that it doesn't happen that easily. So part of this is understanding that not everybody who may appear mentally ill truly is mentally ill. We all have our bad days. It may be an alcohol or drug intoxication issue. One of the things we talk about in our CIT is understanding personality disorders. Personality disorders are in the DSM, our diagnostic manual, but they're not something that we are able to treat the same way, and it's actually a rule out in a lot of times, and we're looking at involuntary services.
Rule out meaning you can't take them,
right.
put them in the service against their will.
Right. It has to be based upon a mental illness, and personality disorder does not count as part of that. So if somebody is having behaviors, but it's just solely antisocial personality disorder, and it's not based upon some mental illness, then we can't move forward with the involuntary commitment process. It has to be based upon a mental illness. Personality disorders are a rule out. Let me talk about some of the limitations then in that process about how come you just can't go and pick these individuals up. Talk about some of the system limitations, some of the treatment limitations, and then some of the legal aspects. So some of the system limitations is the limited availability of hospitalizations or higher levels of care. We really have one secure residential treatment facility here in Jackson County. There really aren't very many facilities statewide. Getting even into one of these facilities, the threshold is pretty high. It's really those for the most seriously at risk of themselves or others. So the criteria to get into a higher level is a pretty high criteria, the threshold. The other thing is, even if they were able to get to the point of being able to go to the state hospital, which is the highest level of services, even that is a very limited time frame. So the state hospital, they're usually there for 3 different reasons. They're either going there because they've been found guilty, except for insanity. And they're there for about 2.5 years is their average. If somebody has gone through the process to be civilly committed, and I'll talk about that process in a moment, their average is about 4 months. And if they're up there for aid and assist, then they're up there for about 2.5 months. So even if somebody was a high risk to themselves, they went through the whole commitment process, they do get to the state hospital, you're still talking about 4 months before they're going to return back to the community. So the idea that there is some level of long-term treatment that they're going to be in, our long-term treatment for mental health issues is really about 4 months. So we're really looking at the community. What do we do in the community to help get the resources, wrap services around people, because they're not going to, the idea of sending them away to some long-term treatment facility just isn't a reality for most individuals. Some of the treatment limitations. So I always say, you can lead a horse to water, you can lead a person to therapy. People change voluntarily. I don't know if you've ever been to your doctor and they tell you, yeah, maybe you should start doing this, and you walk out like, no way, I'm not going to do that, doctor. Well, how many times do we get people come in and we tell them, you should really change? There's got to be some level of voluntary nature for a true change to happen. So that's always our first approach, is how do we get them involved in services? How do we help them voluntarily change? But there is a point where we can look at involuntary services. There's a threshold that they would need to meet in order for us to involuntarily have them involved in treatment. But again, do they truly change? That's a bigger question. And I'll talk about that involuntary threshold here in a sec. Again, personality disorders, they may look like it's a mental health issue, but it's not related to mental health. It's really a personality. It's a lifelong kind of way of addressing the world. It doesn't really, it's not something that we can treat the same way. Most of the personality disorders are not something that we can even bill for through Oregon Health Plan or other insurances. So personality disorders are often a challenge. And then really looking at, sometimes people think, well, if they just get medications, maybe that's the answer. But, the efficacy or the effectiveness of medications, they have to take them consistently. And if you've ever seen somebody that has, 10 different medications they may be prescribed at different times of the day, that's a challenge. And then even if they are taking them consistently, it's not 100%. Our psychiatrist, Dr. Mann, talks about those that are on antipsychotics, even if they're taking them consistently, the efficacy is about 40%, meaning their symptoms would be reduced about 40%. But you still have the 60% of the symptoms that are still remaining, even when they're on their medications consistently. That's the part we still have to address in treatment. So that's just one of the realities is medications isn't going to be an automatic. There's still a treatment component that we have to address. All right, so some of the legal limitations. I've alluded to this a couple times, the idea of the threshold in Oregon. Oregon laws are really focused on personal rights and not so much about how easy it is for us to take those rights away. It's a pretty high threshold that we need to reach in order to involuntarily have somebody mandated to treatment. And the focus really is on the kind of the main three areas of, because of a mental illness, they are either a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or an inability to care. And that inability to care is more than just being homeless. It has to be because of the mental illness, they would not be able to know where the dumpster is to find food. That's the level of inability. So as we're looking at figuring out how to help somebody, there's a process that we go through in order to get them, take them into custody, get them to the hospital, and then look at treatment and a possible commitment. So let me cover those three areas briefly. So custody means that either law enforcement, if they have probable cause, they can determine that this person is a danger to themselves or others, and they can take them to the hospital. As Jackson County, as part of the Oregon rules, allows the division director, so Mark Orndorff, to designate people to also take people into custody if we deem that they are a risk to themselves or others. So my crisis team are directors designees. They have the authority, if we see somebody who is a danger to themselves or others, inability to care, needs immediate treatment, we can also take them into custody, call law enforcement, and law enforcement will transport. Once the next step is they will transport them to the hospital. So that custody really just gets them to the hospital. Once they're at the hospital, it now becomes not a clinical decision, now it's a medical decision. Now the doctors at the hospital, and usually we're talking about Rogue Regional because they are the hospital here that has the acute inpatient. Their doctors are authorized to do a hospital hold. So their doctors can determine whether or not they're going to put that person on a hold. It's not the county's decision, it's not law enforcement's decision, it's the doctors at the hospital. If they put that person on a hold, it now creates a legal process. Courts are notified. I have investigators that now follow up with them. But they only have 5 days, 5 judicial days, so weekends and holidays don't count. But they only have 5 days that they can remain on that hold. At the end of those 5 days, they either need to be discharged from the hospital or they have to have gone to a commitment. Right now, we're about 3% of those that are put on a hold are actually committed. It's a very low rate, those that are actually end up being committed, that are put on a hold. It's really a very short treatment episode. Again, by day 2, they need to determine, the investigator has to determine, are we going to take this person to a commitment hearing? Because by day 3, we have to have a defense attorney involved, we have to notify the court, judges have to be in place. So it's a very short time frame that they have to determine if we're going to take them to a commitment hearing. So by day 5, we would have a commitment hearing. They happen up at Rogue Regional, 7:30 in the morning. Judges show up, court reporters there, defense attorney's there, our district attorney is there, witnesses are called. And now it moves from a medical decision to a legal decision. So initially we may be looking at the clinical treatment aspect, then it moves to a medical aspect, now it's a legal. This is no longer us as clinicians being able to make these determinations. It has to be a court hearing, and the judge is making the determination whether or not this person is going to be committed. If the case is made that they are committed, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to go to the state hospital. It just means that for the next 180 days, for 6 months, they need to follow through with treatment recommendations. So they may or may not end up in a residential treatment facility. It doesn't guarantee that. It does make it easier to get them to the state hospital if that's what's needed, but it's not a guarantee either. So that's where we are following up with them. My staff is working with them, working with community partners to help them get involved in treatment. Because even once we mandate, even once they get committed, there's still a level of voluntary. They still have to agree to participate. We can't mandate medications, can't mandate them in the hospital. Even the state hospital, there's a whole process that they're going to force medications. So really the involuntary nature in Oregon, high threshold, and the focus is how do we help people voluntarily agree to participate. I think that's my slides. If you have other questions, next slide. Again, you have our info. You're welcome to call me, call our crisis team 24/7. We are available to consult, answer questions, help family members navigate the system. All right, any questions?
All right. How about a round of applause for all our presenters today? We do have a couple more minutes, and I'll be kind because everybody did give their time to present and not ask everybody to come back up. But are there questions specific to any of the presenters we heard today? Okay. Yes, Mayor.
Can you help distinguish between transient people who come through? Let me see if I have to say a couple of sentences. In Ashland, we'll have people on the streets who look like they're homeless, but in fact they're living in repainted school buses and shuffling around in the community. And I try to distinguish between our local homeless people for whom we take responsibility or try to help or try to collaborate in the community, and then people who are basically transient one way or another. In these presentations, I didn't hear any kind of distinction like that happening. There was talk of people coming here for services, but this is a different kind of thing. I consider it a national domestic refugee crisis. People on the road, living on the road, but also behaving in the community as if they were homeless.
Right, and I'll defer this to Connie a little bit, but I think you touched on it, Connie, when you talked about the length of time people are in our community. But does the mayor's question ring in terms of ways we've looked to define the problem, and is it helpful to define the problem that way sometimes?
I think it can be problematic. Individuals who are living in a bus, if they're not cooking facilities and restroom facilities, that's still considered being unsheltered. Even though that might be the way that family, that household is moving from community to community, there's still really meaning the definition of being homeless. So I don't think that I would slice it so thinly as to say transient versus generally homeless. And I just worry that transient might have a derogatory connotation to it as well.
But Connie, didn't you mention that one of the questions you all asked in the hit count was how many of them were living here.
Right.
And that seemed like that count was very high.
It was.
So if we go back to the mayor's question, really, it sounds like it's a very small percentage. that
We got
really-
around 10% that
Right.
said that they were already experiencing homelessness when they came here.
Right.
The rest were saying that they were living in Jackson County before they entered into this particular episode of homelessness.
And Connie, was that number different in Ashland versus Medford, do you know, or?
We didn't
Okay.
break it down over where they were particularly living in the county.
All right, well, part 2 is going to be about some of the wraparound supports and the longer-term interventions that we're going to do. But again, thanks to all of our guests, and we will communicate by email as to when that is. So thank you very much.